Stay with me. I know I write about my stories with a slight bit of indifference, mostly because ghosts is something I have had to deal with in my life from time to time. I have had a slightly harder time writing about the one experience that I feel was dangerous. I was invited on short notice to a wedding for one of my first cousins that takes place at Mazatlan, Mexico. I literally got off work midday, picked up my wife, and got to the airport, flew in and was watching the sunset at a beach restaurant almost surreally. The next day, we took a tour of the city and heard about the fishing fleets that didn't come back and the plagues and rowdiness that were brought in because it was a port town. I have no connection with this part of Mexico, so I know very little about it. The first turn of the tour was being brought to an area that had a sea cave called the Devil's Cave. I figured that most seaside places had one, but the guide said that it was named that because during the revolution, women were defiled and murdered there. After such an uplifting tour, we were dropped off downtown. We went to the Carnival Museum, which had a heavy feeling. We then heard that there was an opera house or theater called Teatro Angela Peralta. It had been in ruins and recently restored. There was nothing very special about it until me and my wife went inside. I was in the middle of the seating area when it started feeling chilly. It was like 98 degrees outside, and I very much doubt this place had AC. I then felt it get harder to catch my breath, and my heart was pounding. This is what I remember after that. I had an overwhelming need to walk to the back of the theater and turn to the right hallway. The lights were off in the hallway, and I kept walking. I heard a heartbeat and felt as if someone was walking with me. I assumed it was my wife. I could hear breathing in my ears as I walked down the hallway. My arms were at my side. The breathing slowed down, and I felt a hand grab mine. I could feel long fingernails and a tiny hand in my palm that let me know this was not my wife. A second afterwards, I heard a deep breath and what I could only describe as a last breath, and then the hand let go. I had been walking towards a light far at the end of the hallway that curved around the auditorium. I stopped to catch my breath as my heart was pounding and I felt sick. I had lost control of myself for what seemed like a few minutes, but was actually maybe one. I came out there gasping, and my wife was behind me, about 10 feet behind. She said that she followed me into the hallway and saw the light at the end of it, but could not see me there. I came out of the blue walking towards her. She had been trying to catch up with me. I didn't tell her what had happened at first. I thought I was having a heart attack. I sat for a while, then got up and walked to the museum of the theater. It was then I read that the theater had been destroyed several times, that it was used as a hospital during the plagues, and women were defiled and killed there during the revolution when the town fell. During the last time it was destroyed, it was a haven for killers and drug addicts. All that dark history in a very well-restored opera house. I told my wife that night what had happened, and she said she can never go back there. I can't help but agree. Something felt comfortable with my presence and wanted me to go with it. My current home. 2 years ago, my wife and I moved in with my dad to keep an eye on him, as he is getting old and his health isn't the greatest. As it turns out, the place is haunted. At first we thought it was haunted by the previous owner's wife, but now we are not sure. The previous owners had lived there for the last 40 to 50 years, and before them, there was nobody on the property. They were the only ones to live in the home before us. The husband passed away about 4 years ago, and his wife passed 10 or so years ago. Before we moved in, my dad told me how things would disappear all the time. A month or so before moving in, we visited for the evening. We all sat in the living room, talking and watching TV. Dad said he had a 6-pack of beer in the fridge and how I could have one. A few minutes later, I got a beer. It was in bottles in a 6-pack box. I opened the fridge, pulled the bottle out of the box without so much as touching the box, and shut the door. I went back to my seat and we continued doing our thing. From where I was in the living room, I could see the fridge. My dad could see the whole kitchen and was facing the fridge. Half an hour later, and he said he might as well have one too. So he got up and went to the kitchen to get a beer. While he was in there, he said to me, "You could have put them back in the fridge. They're getting warm." I said, "What?" He repeated himself as he opened the fridge and put the 6-pack of beer, sans 2 bottles, back in. I informed him that I hadn't taken it out of the fridge in the first place. Neither of us had ever seen or heard the fridge door open or close, yet the beer was sitting on the counter. After we moved in, we experienced that going on all the time. After 2 years, I've lost over half dozen DVDs. I can't begin to list everything I've gone to look for, only to have it be gone. Sometimes I find something a while later in a completely different spot, but most of the time we just never see it again. I had to get my Indiana driver's license, which meant I had to take their test. I took a study book home to read up on what they consider to be traffic laws. It was gone a couple days later. Still haven't found it. The next day, my dad was home alone and the TV remote, which he keeps on the table next to his chair, was gone. He searched for over an hour, dissecting the bathroom, kitchen, dining room, and living room, but couldn't find it. Finally, he just turned the TV on at the TV and went to make lunch. He turned on the oven and got frozen chicken out of the freezer. He opened the bag of chicken and realized he forgot to get the baking tray out of the oven. So he opened it and the tray was in the oven with the remote sitting on it. Another thing that happened once to me, my wife and I laid down in bed one night. Our dog jumped in it with us, like she does, and I felt her flop down. When she did, I felt her lay up against my shins, which she also does. My wife told her to move, and I felt her move away from my legs. My wife told her to move again, and I said she did. My wife said she didn't move, and said she had been laying right in between us the whole time. I felt as she was nowhere near my shins. What had sat down and leaned up against me? No idea, but I had a hard time sleeping that night. My wife informed me that she feels something sit down on our bed all the time. On other things that go on here include lights going on and off by themselves, the front door locking itself and me out 5 times, the TV turned on once by itself after I had turned it off and set the remote down, and we hear talking in here all the time. My wife and I sit in our room a lot, and usually I hear my name called from the hallway and it sounds like my dad. In the beginning, I would respond or go out to talk, only to discover he hadn't called, or he was asleep, or he wasn't there at all. Plus, we leave our door cracked open so our cat can come and go happily. From where I sit, I can see the hall, and I can easily see it when he's in it. My wife has heard her name too, as if he called, but not nearly as much as I hear mine. And when we hear our names called, the other of us doesn't hear it. The other day, I clearly heard my wife yell my name, which my dad didn't hear while sitting right next to me, and she said she hadn't, while also having not heard it. And one day my dad, while home alone, heard someone yell out to the living room from our bedroom, "Who's there?" And he didn't recognize the voice. He checked and nobody was there. Well, we always thought it was the lady who lived here before. Now, we are not so sure. All 3 of us have seen a black, cloudy mist the size of a person float through here. I've seen it once or twice. My wife has seen it a few times, and Dad has seen it a dozen or more. One time during the day, when it was really sunny out and the inside of our place was all lit up, Dad saw it come out of the bathroom, move down the hall into our bedroom, and he said the bedroom went dark, as if it were night out. My wife once woke up and saw it above her, and then it disappeared up into the ceiling. I'm not sure what it is, but that's most of the stuff that has happened inside the home. I'll talk about some of the stuff that has happened outside in the next post. Part 2. The property we live on is 62 acres and used to be a pay lake and campground. Over the years, many people came through and it was loved by everyone. The owner retired and closed the lake 10 or so years ago. My dad, who has known the owner since he was a kid, lived in a camper for a few years before moving into the trailer where we all live now. While he lived in the camper, Dad would often sit outside at a picnic table and read. Right next to him was an old metal fishing shelter, and behind him was the gravel parking lot. One night, he was shocked when a man walked around the shelter and said hi to him. Dad said hi back, and the man asked some questions, mostly about the old couple who owned the place. Dad said they were home if he'd like to go up and talk to them, but he said no, he had to be somewhere, and walked back around the shelter. My dad said he never heard a car come or go, so he isn't sure where the guy came from or went to. We are in the country and there's nothing around us. If he had come from a neighbor's house and walked, it would have been very dark, especially if he came from the way he seemed to. It's all woods that way. My dad mentioned the man to the owners, who had incredible memories and knew everyone who ever came there to fish. They had no idea who he was. Months later, the man returned the same way, and that night they spoke again. Only this time, when the man left the same way as last time, my dad followed. When Dad got around the shelter, he saw nobody. After the lake closed, Dad wasn't the only one renting a camper from the owner, and all three of the renters, Dad included, would regularly hear cars running right next to their campers or cars doors shutting, yet no cars would ever be seen. That still goes on. Me or Dad are regularly going out at night to see if people are trespassing. Many have seen UFOs out there and in all the areas around there. A few times I was outside at night and heard breathing, growling, or footsteps that all sounded like an animal, particularly a dog of some kind. But when I would check it out, I'd find nothing. Once I heard a cow moo, and another time I heard what I could only figure was a goose, though I'm really not sure as I've never heard the sound before, and they both sounded as if they came from the field in front of our place. Maybe a goose had been there, but it is highly unlikely a cow was. One day, I was outside and heard our cat meowing in the front room inside. His litter box is in there, and when I take the dog out, the cat has separation anxiety from the dog. Cute, right? And will go in that room, climb up on my wife's desk, and look out the window at me. On this particular day, I heard him meowing and thought nothing of it, until I heard 4 or 5 very heavy footsteps walking rapidly into that room. Honestly, it didn't even sound like our floor making that noise. It sounded heavier, deeper. When the footsteps stopped, I heard my cat meow like I had never heard him meow before or since. I can't even explain the sound. But honestly, it sounded like he were responding to whatever had gone in there with him. A moment later, I heard what sounded like my cat tearing out of the room, and then I heard him meowing like he normally does, but from the front door.